So hello everyone, welcome back again here to a new video. Now this is an installation of Fedora. So if you're wondering why I have KDE on the desktop, it's because I installed Fedora using the Everything ISO. I did already a video about how you can install Fedora with Everything ISO. It's basically an ISO where you can install Fedora with the choice of packages you want. So you can choose to install KDE or another desktop environment or also several other window managers. And you will find this under the alternate downloads on the Fedora website. Now, just for a change here, I built this with the KDE desktop environment, but as I said, you can of course choose any other desktop environment or window manager of your choice. What I'm going to show you in this video is going to work whether you're using a desktop environment or a window manager anyway. Now, today we are going to talk about SELinux. Now, let's have a look at what is SELinux before we dive into it. Now, for my reference here, I opened up the Arch Wiki because it contains very good information also about SELinux. So as you can see here, Security Enhanced Linux, also called SELinux, is a Linux feature that provides a variety of security policies, including US Department of Defense style mandatory access control, through the use of Linux security modules, or LSM, in the Linux kernel. So it's not a Linux distribution, but rather a set of modifications that can be applied to Unix-like operating systems such as Linux and BSD. Now, SELinux is one variation of this possibility. The other one is AppArmor, although it works a little bit differently, and I will do a separate video about that. But AppArmor is definitely easier to implement, whereas with SELinux, it's a little bit more complex. Now, SELinux comes standard with Fedora, CentOS, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And on other distributions, there are some possibility to install it, but for example, on Arch Linux, it's currently not officially supported, and an easier alternative is to install AppArmor, for which, as I said before, I will do a separate video. Anyway, in this video, we're going to concentrate on SELinux here on Fedora, and as I said, you will find SELinux on any distribution based on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Now, let me close this window. And let me open up here the terminal. So let's switch here first to the root user because this is root stuff and I don't want to type sudo the old time here. So let's clean up the terminal. So let's start here from a very simple example. Let's type in here ls-ld and hit enter. So this is my home directory. It's the root home directory. And this command, as you probably already know, it's listing the properties of this directory. Now, there is something that is new if you have SELinux installed, and that is if you use the uppercase Z switch, and then we can hit enter again. Now, you can see here we see something else. We have more parameters to check here, and more precisely, we have these three parameters, which comes in handy. So we have systemu, object R, and admin home T. So I'm not going to go in detail to all of these because some of these are really advanced SELinux, but I can just tell you for now that systemu refers to the user, object R refers to the role, and admin home T refers to the type. And this is the one that is the most common, and that's the one we are going to have a look today. So these are basically labels that SELinux puts to every file and every directory in the system. So because this is in my home directory, the type label in this case is going to be admin home _t for type. So whenever we need to check for permissions for SELinux, we are going to use always the uppercase Z switch in order to check the properties. Now, SELinux comes, as I said, pre-installed here in Fedora, and by default, it's enabled. To get the status of SELinux, you can type in the terminal get enforce and hit enter. And you can see it says enforcing. Now we can change the enforcing method for SELinux by using the set enforce command. So if I type in now set enforce and then 0 and hit enter and type in again get enforce, you can see it's now permissive. It means basically that the policy that is in SELinux, when it's in permissive mode, it's not going to be checked. It's going to be logging everything what the system is doing nevertheless, but it's not going to enforce the policy which is in SELinux. So to switch methods here between enforcing and permissive, it's a basic step to troubleshoot when there is an SELinux problem. Now to get back to enforcing, we're going to type set enforce 1. And if we type in again get enforce, it's going to go back to enforcing. There you go. So let's clean up the terminal. Now, to show you a practical example on how SELinux works, I'm going to use the web server because this is the most common problem where you might encounter an SELinux issue. So let's check first if the server is installed here in the system by typing in systemctl status httpd, which is a service for the Apache web server. And you can see here HTTPD service could not be found. So that means it's not installed by default in Fedora. So we can clean up the terminal and install it by typing in dnf install HTTPD and hit enter. Now it's going to take a moment here to find the packages. There you go. And we can hit Y here to accept the installation. It's going to take a second here. It's not a long installation. There you go. Now we need to enable the web server. So to do this, we can type in systemctl enable -- now and then HTTPD and hit enter. And now if we check again the status like we checked before, you can see now the web server is up and running. Now we can check this also actually on our browser. If we pull up again here Firefox and I type in here localhost, we should see here the Fedora web server test page, which is here. So that means the server is up and running correctly. We can also check this also in the terminal, of course, by using the curl command and then localhost and hit enter. And you can see here, we see the HTML code for the page, but it shows anyway, nevertheless, that the server is up and running correctly. Now let's clean up the terminal. Now, by default, the web server here on Fedora is situated under var www.html. So if I go in there by typing in cd/var/www/html and then list the file in here, you can see we have nothing. So this is basically the basic directory where the server is going to look for your index.html file. Now, in certain situations, it might be maybe necessary to change the root directory for the web server. Now, to change the root directory of the Apache web server can be done by going into the configuration file for HTTPD. So let's do here an example. So let's say that we want to do that. So I'm going to use Vim. You can use, of course, any other editor if you like, and then /etc/httpd/conf and then httpd.conf. This is the configuration file for our web server. Now we have several options here that we could explore, but the one that I need to change is actually the document roots, which I'm going to search for and then hit enter. So basically we have here two things that we need to change if we want to change the document root for our web server. So one is the document root directory here. And the other one is this further relax access to the default document root. So let's say that in this case, I want to change actually the document root for the web server to be in another directory. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to edit this line and I'm going to replace this directory with another one. So let's say that I want to call the new directory web server. And I'm going to do the same here for the relaxed access. So I'm just going to change this to web server. Of course, we need to create this directory. So now we can save the file and exit Vim. And let's create the directory by typing in mkdir and then /web server. And hit enter. Okay, so what we need to do now, we need to restart our web server. So to do this, we can type in systemctl restart and then httpd and hit enter. There you go. So let's create now an index.html file in this new directory by typing in vim and then /web server. And I'm going to call it index.html and hit enter. And I'm going to put in here hello from the new location. There you go. Now we can save the file and exit Vim. So now we restarted the server, so we should be able here to see the new page. So let's type in again curl and then localhost and hit enter. We still see here the old configuration for the web server. And as you can see here also on the graphical interface, we get a warning that something is wrong with SELinux. I'm going to look at that warning in a second, but before doing that, let's see what happens if we put SELinux in permissive mode. So let's type in set enforce 0 And we check this by typing in again get enforce. And you can see now we are in permissive mode. So I'm going to restart one more time my HTTPD web server and type in again curl and then localhost. And you can see we have here a hello from the new location. So definitely SELinux here is on the way. What SELinux is trying to do, it's telling you basically that when the policy is enforced, it cannot access the new location because the label type is wrong on the new server directory. So let's go back here to enforcing mode by typing in set enforce 1. And let's clean up the terminal. Now let me type in ls-ld and then /var/dub/html. And I forgot here to put the Z to check the SELinux status, so uppercase Z. There you go. You can see here the file context type label is httpd syscontent_t. So that's the one actually that SELinux is expecting also in the new web server directory. But let's have a look at the new web server directory by typing in ls-ldz and then /web server. And you can see here the type is still default_t. So because of this difference, SELinux is basically blocking the access to my new web server directory. So how can we change this behavior? Well, we have several possibilities. One is to check actually the man page for the SEmanage fcontext command, or we can also troubleshoot by using the log in our system or also by using the graphical interface. Now, this is really a matter of personal preference, but it's always useful to check actually the man page and also to check the log messages, because sometimes you don't have access to the graphical interface, and in that case, it's good to know actually how to do it from a terminal. So the process here to change the file context label, it's basically a two-step process. One, we need to change the label on the new directory, and second, we need to then restore this label using the policy. So the command to do that is the SEmanage fcontext command. So let's type in here man to check the man page, SEmanage -fcontext, and hit enter. Now this you can see on the top here, SELinux policy management file control tool. So SEmanage is used to configure certain elements of SELinux policy without requiring modification to or recompilation from policy sources. SEmanage fcontext is used to manage the default file system labeling on an SELinux system. This command maps file path using regular expressions to SELinux labels. And it explains you here all the possibilities that you have. Now, one very nice thing here is that on the end of the file, it's going to give you some example. So for example, here it says, if you want to change the content directory, in this case, it's of the web server, this is the command you need to run. So we are basically saying SEmanage fcontext. So we need to manage the context label for SELinux. And we are going to use this label on the new directory. And then once we have done that, we need to then, as it says here on the top, remember to run the restore con after you set the file context. We need to run restore con on the directory so that the label is properly set. So this is one way how we can do it. We could actually copy this command here and replace just web with web server, because that's the directory we created, and then run the restore con command with the web server directory here, and then it would work again. This is one approach. The other approach, if I get out of the manual page here, is, as you can see here also on the graphical interface, we have a warning. That means we have also something in the logs. So because SELinux is using the audit log, we can check also the AVC log messages. So we can check that by typing in grep avc on /var/log/messages and hit enter. And as you can see here, we have some warnings. I'm going to pick here the last one. And you can see here we have one message about access violation. So what it says here, basically it says the access was denied for the PID, which is the process ID, and the command was HTTPD, which was our server. The access denied path was web server index HTML. That's the one we created now. And then we have here the source context and also the target context. And you can see here we have a difference also here in the labels. That's why the system didn't work out, basically. So this is one way how we can check these log messages. The other way, which is probably the most practical way, is to check for C alert in the log. So we can also type in here grep SE alert And then this, we're going to do it on /var again, /log/messages, and hit enter. So you can see here we have basically the same communication. It says SELinux is preventing HTTPD from map access on the file web server index.html. For complete SELinux messages, run this command. So what we're going to do here, we're going to basically copy this command here, and I'm going to clean up the terminal to have a bit more space, and we're going to paste it in here, and then hit enter. Now this is going to produce a lot of text, so I'm going to go back here on the top. And this is the one actually I'm looking for. So there are many possibilities here that the command is telling us, but the one that I'm looking for is this one. If you want to allow HTTPD to have map access on the index.html file, then you need to change the label on web server index.html. And then it tells you also what to do. So it says do semanage fcontext at file type web server index.html, where file type is one of the following. And you can see the list is huge here. So it's definitely one which has to do with HTTPD, and I bet this is the one, HTTPD sys content _t. So what we need to do here, we would need to type in this command by replacing file type, and then also use the restore_con command to restore the policy. But let's go back one more time to the man page by typing in man semanage -fcontext. And I'm going to go down to the end of the file here. So I'm going to use actually this command, because this command is going to change actually the label also inside the directory to any file existing in it. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to exit this page, and I'm going to paste this in, but I'm going to change the directory because we don't have /web but /web server, and then hit enter. Now this is doing the relabeling. Now we need to use the restore_con command to restore the policy. So we can type in restore_con -r for recursive, and then -v, and on which directory? That's the /web server directory, and then hit enter. And you can see now it's relabeled the directory. So let's check again our SELinux status, get enforce. And you can see it's enforcing. So let's restart now our web server, systemctl, restart, HTTPD, and let's type in again curl and then localhost. And if everything went well, we will see the message on the new location. And there you go, we can see there hello from the new location, and SELinux is enforcing. So now the policy is correct, and we can use our new web directory. Now we could have used also the same thing using the graphical interface here by clicking this SE applet. It's going to be the same also in GNOME desktop environment. Let me move over this on the center. And as you can see here, it says basically the same thing. The source process HTTPD attended this access map on this file. So what we need to do here, well, so we can click troubleshoot, and it gives us basically the same information. So if you want to allow domain to can and map files, then we need to use this command. But that's not the one we want. What we want is if you want to allow HTTPD to have map access on the index.html file, then you need to use this command, which is the one we saw before. So you can also troubleshoot from here. Just don't forget that you need to scroll down here, and at the end, you'll then need to execute the restore_con -v command on the directory and the file. So this is another way how we can troubleshoot this. Now, another thing that I would like to point out here is that in the future, it might be possible that you may create other files into the web directory that might be needed on the server. So let's see how we can do this and what's the best practice. Let's type in here touch file1 and hit enter. I'm just creating a random file here. It can be anything. This is just an example. So if I type in here now ls-l Z on file 1 to check also the SELinux status on this file, you can see here the type is admin home. Well, it's created in the admin directory, so it's admin home, logically so. So what happens if we copy this file into our new directory? So let's do this by typing in cp file1 and then /web server and hit enter. Now, if we list the file1 on the web server directory by typing in ls-lz and then web server and then file1, you can see that the file basically inherited the label from the directory. It's httpd sys content _t. So that's going to work fine. Now let me actually remove that file. So I'm going to type in rm-rf/web-server/file1. And we are going to move this time the file1 from my home directory to the web server directory. So let's type in move file1 to web server and hit enter. Now let's check again the properties of the file with the Z switch here. So you can see what happens if you move the file from one position to another one. It's going to come into the new position with the old label. This is my home, my root home label. So if you are moving a file, you will have to again run the semanage fcontext and restore con commands to have this file correctly in the directory. So whenever you're creating a new file in another directory and you want to move it in this directory, the best way to do that is to copy the file and not move it. Otherwise, you will have to restore again the labels. Okay, this is going to do it for a basic overview of SELinux. It sounds complicated at the beginning, but it's actually not that difficult. The purpose of SELinux is to make sure that the system doesn't get messed up by moving files around, and it makes sure that processes have access only to what they are supposed to have access unless specified otherwise. So SELinux, it's definitely a useful tool in this case, and it offers also good tools for troubleshooting as we have seen in this video. Now there is much advanced use of SELinux that I'm not going to explore, at least not in this video, but for a basic usage this should be enough. If you try this out, let me know in the comments below how it's working for you. And if you have any question about the video, let me also know in the comments below. I will try as usual to answer you as soon as I can.